Ready to go? All right, I'd like to call the commission back to order here. Mr. Gibson, Kevin Gibson, I'd like to call you forward. We didn't get you on your presentation as far as and during the staff introduction, so let me get you sworn in up here, and then we'll get your name and address for the record, and if you've got any information you need to bring to us. Get Ms. Nunn to swear you in here.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And just name and address and your title or what you do.
My name is Kevin H. Gibson, 700 West Jefferson Street, LaGrange, Kentucky. I'm the general manager for Oldham County Environmental Authority, the sewers that will be serving this property.
Okay.
I'm here this morning to talk about the capacity at the Ohio River Treatment Plant.
Can you speak up a little bit? It's hard for them to hear in the back, so do the best you can.
I'm sorry. The capacity at the Ohio River Treatment Plant is currently at 45%. We currently have plenty of capacity for this development, and the development will be tying into the Pebble Point pump station. That pump station also has capacity, is currently at 70%. That is the extent of my report this morning. Any questions will be.
Is there any questions for Mr. Gibson? Okay.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Yes, sir.
There is capacity.
Correct.
For this development.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll have our opportunity for additional questions as we move forward through the hearing, but thank you, sir, appreciate it.
you.
And folks, if you're having trouble hearing, we'll try to get the folks to speak up. We've got a microphone that does marginally picking up. We do have a couple of headsets that are available if you would like those, and if not, if you can move forward a little bit in the room, you might be able to hear a little bit better. So some of these speakers do a better job of picking up than others, but if you have trouble hearing, we do have a couple of three earphones or headsets that we can let you have, and that will help some also.
Mr. Williams has an answer to Mr. McWilliams' question, so if you want to call Michael back up.
Oh, okay. Michael, I'm sorry.
I was able to speak to the Transportation Department, and they report no issues on Goshen Lane.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
All right, with that, we'll now move into the presentation by the applicant or representatives and others in support of the application. And Mr. Talbot, you have 50 minutes, and if we could, whoever you think will be speaking, if we could go ahead and get them sworn in, then as they come up to speak, we will get their name and address for the record.
Very good. We'll get all of our group to get sworn in, and then I'll identify them afterwards in my
Okay.
presentation. I think we'll only have a couple testify, though.
Okay, all right.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay. Mr. Talbot?
First of all, thank you all very much. My name's John Talbot. I'm with Barden Warper Talbot and Roberts, and we represent Pulte Homes here for the preliminary subdivision plan. We've got a report. We've had a lot of meetings with this. We've met with the neighbors on 2 occasions already. As you'll hear me point out a couple times, we're only required under the regulations to meet once. We're also only required to invite the first tier of neighbors. The first tier are the people that are immediately adjacent to the property, and then within 500 feet, we went well beyond that. We went to 2 tiers in our meetings, and even beyond that to include some of the folks in Taylor Creek subdivision. It's encouraging to see all the people here today. As I've told them at our neighborhood meetings, this is a very transparent process. Our firm prides itself on telling our clients, we want it to be transparent. The last thing we want is for people to think that there are backroom deals going on that are not going on. And even in this case, the regulations, because it's just a preliminary subdivision plan, and we're not asking for any waivers or variances, that we don't even have to ask for a public hearing. And we're here today, we asked for a public hearing. We're not running scared from anybody or anything on this case. We're proud of it, and we think it's a good one. So again, just let me emphasize, this is a preliminary subdivision plan. It's not a zoning change. There's a distinct difference between those two. A subdivision plan basically is an administrative level approval. It's a ministerial decision. That's what the courts say. That's what the law says. What does that mean? That means if we check our boxes, if we comply with your regulations, you have to approve us. That's what it means. If we ask for variances or waivers or zoning approval, it's discretionary. It's a totally different standard. A lot of the things that have come up at the neighborhood meetings and that we've seen in the opposition, that I've seen in the opposition letters, they have no relevance or bearing to a preliminary subdivision plan. They come down to discretionary decisions, and I'm not certain if they just don't understand or not, but I want the people behind me to understand this is not a discretionary decision that we're here for today. The other thing, before I get into the nuts and bolts of our development, you'll see as I go through this presentation that this neighborhood that's being proposed is a natural progression of the development that has already occurred. You'll see as you go from 42, you will see subdivision after subdivision clustered in this area of Oldham County, and we are going to the outskirts of that, adjacent to it. We're not doing hopping into a place that there's no other subdivision or development or infrastructure around. It's an appropriate place for future development. Now, as you all well know, having been to a lot of these meetings before, nobody likes development. There's always the constant conflict of a community wants and needs development in progress, but the people that are immediately adjacent to it usually are opposed to it. And that's exactly what we have here today. It's nothing new. The numbers seem to be a lot, but I'll comment on that. But what we see here today in terms of opposition is nothing new, and that's the things that you'll need to understand today. But since it's not a discretionary decision, this is not a popularity contest. This is a question of whether we meet the administrative regulations for a preliminary subdivision plan. You'll see as we go through this presentation that our proposal will provide a lot of necessary and needed upgrades to this area. You heard about the roads, also water. Both of those things are important for this area and to improve safety in this area of Oldham County. And they're going to improve it significantly. We meet all the legal requirements. I told people at the first and second neighborhood meeting, if you're honestly for improving the safety of this area, you will be for this development. And if you're not for those safety improvements, it's simply because you don't want the development near you. That's the only reason. If this subdivision is proposed and built, it will improve safety significantly. Now, I mentioned, I usually don't give a lot of comments on the opposition, but there's been significant amount of letters that have been put into the record in this case. And I think some of it does bear a little bit of commentary. I read those letters, and you will probably have read a lot too. There was an email put in there, and I forget in which batch it was in, but it was obviously inadvertently put in. But it was from one person to a homeowners association. They talked about we have not one form letter, not two form letters, but 3 form letters. And the email made it clear that they wanted to get as many letters as they could using those form letters. And why do I bring that up? Well, I think it's important to the extent you see a lot of opposition letters, you understand this is not necessarily a grassroots swell of opposition. This has been an organized opposition, very organized. Another thing that's important to point out is, in my opinion, there's a letter from a company that's actually, it's a resolution that was put in the opposition letters. In my opinion, this company is primarily behind the opposition. The same person that owns that company is constantly on the emails and was on that email that said we're writing the form letters. This company, and in the form letters, one of the primary things they complain about is safety and roads. And they say we cannot handle the additional traffic of having 80 families move into this area on this road. Why do I bring it up? Because the company is relevant to the issues. And you've got to determine the credibility and sincerity of the things that they have raised as objections. The company is an event planning service. They hold weddings and large functions. But on the website, on one of the things, it's all they can accommodate up to 1,000 people. 1,000. So the same people that are going to tell you all today that these roads can't handle 8 families, 8 homes, but people that will live there and care about the area and want to have a safe environment are the same people that are making money promoting having parties with hundreds of people, weddings, at nighttime that don't know the area, that don't live in the area. And so keep that in mind as you go through the opposition. And going through the, to get into the base of my presentation, again, I think Amy did a really good job. We're looking at just over 78 acres. The property is zoned CO1 and R2. CO1 is one level of zoning, R2, they're both residential. And all we're doing is putting residential zoning on this site. I'm going to be fairly brief on some of these slides because Amy did a good job, but this shows you the overview, and primarily you can see US 42 here. Let's see if I can draw that, and then Goshen comes in along this way. And right where I stop is where you get to those S curves. It's really more like a Z curve. You've got two curves that come in at that point, and you'll see that come up in multiple times in this presentation. This is a little bit closer in. This gives you a better idea of where the zoning is, the CO1 and the R2.
If you touch the lower right corner, it'll erase all those arrows and things that we put on.
Thank you. That's not my skill set. Thank you, Mr. Urban. This shows the aerial of our site, and as you can see, a lot of the people that will also complain about our site removing any trees, despite the fact that we're going to retain over 50%, 57% will be protected in this plan as the open space subdivision. You'll notice everyone around it has all their trees removed almost entirely. We're going to preserve more trees than any of the people in the immediate vicinity, and more trees than anybody that you'll see in opposition here today. This is an aerial with our plan based on top, and this is the original plan that we showed at our first neighborhood meeting. The second plan, what I'll show you, the change is really subtle. You'll see there is an open space area in the middle. You basically have two cul-de-sacs in the plan, and then this is the new plan. You have an additional cul-de-sac, and you've got the open space area in the center, the kind of group grounds in the center moved a little bit further down to the neighborhood. This shows the two side by side, and I've got the areas of difference circled. The reason to make these changes, it didn't change really much in terms of substance of the neighborhood itself. What it did is it allowed us to give a little bit more buffering to the neighbors that are immediately adjacent to us. At the neighborhood meetings, a lot of the people that live immediately next to us, they wanted to have more buffers, and we listened to that. And we're required to provide buffers, but we provided a very good buffers that we'll give the details as I go through the presentation. But that was the change. That was the reason for the change to get the layout the way we've done it currently. Now, the open space subdivision, these are the objectives. These are in your all's code that provides a design alternative to conventional subdivisions. Design alternative. It's to change design. It's to provide flexibility. It's an important word, flexibility in the development of areas with environmental constraints, scenic vistas, passive recreational resources, and valuable agricultural resources. This site has things that are environmental that we want to preserve. It has slopes. It has some areas of streams or ephemeral streams that we want to protect, and we're keeping those in the areas that are protected. It's got to have the same gross density of a conventional subdivision. You heard Ms. Alvey say that those things, we meet that. It reduces the cost of constructing and maintaining public improvements such as streets and utilities. By having the lots closer together, you do not have to have as much in infrastructure. You don't have to have as many pipes. You don't have to disturb as much of the ground. You can preserve more, and that's the intent of the open space subdivision. Now, these are the design principles, also in your old regulations. It's to reduce individual lot size, okay? So how do you reduce them? You've got to preserve at least 50%, and then with what land you have left, you can make the size of the lots. Now, can you make them any size that you want? No, you cannot. Your old regs are very specific, because despite the fact that we can reduce the size, we still have setback standards, front yard and backyard standards. So there's a limit to how small we can get. In all the lots, in all the lots on the CO1, we comply with all of the standards set for CO1. All the lots in R2, we comply with all of the setback requirements, yard requirements for R2. We comply with all of those, and that's how you get the size of your lots. The open space is protected by conservation or similar easement. That'll be on our plan. That is on our plan. It may consist of several clustered sections. We have four sections of this neighborhood. The buffering and landscaping provided, I mentioned that briefly, and that is provided, and I'll give a little more detail as we go through that. Now, for the approval for an open space, it makes it clear that the subdivision approval is exactly the same as it is for a normal subdivision. No different. Standards are the same. We are still looking at a ministerial decision, just as I mentioned before, not a discretionary one. The legal test, this is the case, Snyder versus Owensboro. I won't read that. I think most of you all are very familiar with that. But this case is very clear that standards have to be set, and we meet those standards. And if we do, we get approved. That is what the law says for a preliminary subdivision plan. Now let's get in kind of the nuts and bolts of our plan. The total acres, I already mentioned, 78.83 acres. The CO1 acres consist of 38.83 and the R2 is 40, roughly 50-50 on both of those. The developed coverage, this is the part that we will develop with roads and lots. And mind you, even these lots, a lot of them, we are not cutting down every tree on every lot. They are not going to be clear cut. The backs of most of the lots, particularly the lots that abut that are close to adjacent property owners, those trees will be preserved. Now, the question was a fair question, could a owner cut those down? Yeah, they could. Will they likely cut them down? Probably not. I mean, it would be very expensive, and most of the time, those neighbors want to have a buffer just as much as the people that currently live there now. The open space acreage is 45 acres. I mean, one of the things that I've read in many of the letters that criticizing us is on the environmental. And, you know, perhaps you can, there's a lot of things that are subjective in terms of design. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But in terms of environmental, and even though this is not required, it's required to protect the open space, but we go way over and above what's required to protect the sensitive features on this property, and we protect them well. The open space requirements, again, I've said 39 is what all were required. We're going 45, so we're significantly over that. And that comes directly from your all's regulations, Section 5.12A, Design Principle. The same maximum density allowed in a conventional subdivision. This is what your regs say. An open space subdivision has the same gross density of a conventional subdivision, Section 5.12 objectives. Now, what's interesting, and there was a question, I believe Commissioner Douglas, I think it was you, that asked of whether we provided a lot yield plan. We had not because we didn't think it was necessary. We think that we comply under the gross density. You'll have two ways to calculate density. One is gross density figure, and the other is the lot yield plan. In this presentation, we'll provide both, and we'll give you the numbers for both. We comply with both, but the lot yield plan, let me back up. The gross density is just a mathematical calculation. Take 60% of what you could possibly feasibly fit in, okay? That would mean, let me explain that. Once you put in roads, usually your density, you can't get quite as many because of roads. This allows you to pretend there are no roads, you could go maximum. The lot yield plan actually requires you to look and map it out. How many could you actually functionally put on the property? Under the calculations for the max lots under gross density, Amy said 110. I think it's 112, but it's not really a substantively different number either way. Under the lot yield plan, and we'll see that in just a moment, you can go to 98 lots. How many lots are we proposing? 80. We aren't even close to touching the maximum density, the maximum development density for this piece of property. Here's the lot yield plan. I won't spend much time on it. You can see how it would be laid out. And if you have any specific questions, we could bring Derek Triplett from Land Design and Development to answer any questions. But basically, it's in the record, and you can get 98 lots under a lot yield plan. Here's our development. The red lines, which hopefully you all can see, shows the division of the sections. The sections are important, and we'll build that probably generally in those types of phases, one section at a time, and that's the way the development will be brought out. This is a close-up of that. Again, I've got max lots allowed 112. I don't have the lot yield on there, but those things both go hand in hand, and again, we're underneath both. Now, if I could, the two areas that on the buffer in this area, and then obviously under road as well. That's where the buffering is going to be, and we'll get to those slides here. This shows the property. I'm getting my north and south a little bit mixed up, but I think you can see on one side we provide a minimum of 30 feet. That would be, I think, to the north, and then to the southeast, I think, if I've got my bearings correct, we've got a minimum of 40 feet. And again, if you see those lots, that 40 feet does not include the lots. the lots will probably have an additional 20 feet of trees left on them, maybe even more, but probably at least 20. So those buffers will be greater than what's actually displayed. The other side of it, this is along Goshen Lane, and on that part as Goshen Lane wraps around. On that, we provide, on the part that kind of looks like it has the two angled sides at the top of the screen, the maximum is 30 feet. Now, you'll see on the other side along the straight section of Goshen, it's 20 and 50. The buffer is technically 20, but with the right-of-way, the actual tree coverage will be more like 50 feet. So that's what that figure is. And we're not going to cut that or clear those trees down. We are leaving those trees, so they will not be cleared. This is a slide that shows on the bottom white, you can see Highway 42, and then in the white line that goes kind of up to the top, that's Goshen Lane. You can see how it zigzags, you see the Z. What I wanted to show here, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is that our neighborhood is not an albatross. It's not out of place. You've got Harmony Lake, you've got Spindletop, Barbizon Place, Lakeview Estates, Goshen Hills, Lakeview Estates there, Goshen Woods, Settlers Points, Bridgepoint Place. We are going to the next step right next to all of those subdivisions and all of that development. Oldham County is going to have development. It's going to happen. Where do you want it to happen? Would you rather have it in a place where there's no other development, where there's no infrastructure for that? No, of course not. This is a natural progression of this neighborhood to be, and this is where we put it. Taylor Creek, which is a little bit beyond us, honestly, if anything's out of place, Taylor Creek is out of place. It's there, but it's the one that's out of place. It's by itself and was put in a long time ago. We are not repeating the mistake of putting a neighborhood where there's not any other development. We're keeping it immediately adjacent to development that's currently there. Another thing I saw in some of the neighborhood meetings and also in the letters, I saw comments that, well, Goshen only has, I forget the exact number, 900 residents. And this neighborhood's going to increase it by 25%. I don't even understand some of these comments that are made, honestly, because Goshen, we're not even in the city of Goshen. You can see in red where the city of Goshen is. I don't know if people are confused or just don't understand, but we are not in the city of Goshen. Now, what I think is important, and maybe this is the point, is how many people are in this area. If you look in that general area, the amount of lots that you have, there are over 1,000 lots in that area. This is exactly where additional development belongs. And not only are we adding a modest number of only 80 lots to that, we are the only one that is preserving environmental areas, that's preserving open space, preserves open space in woods for the deer, the bunny rabbits, the birds, the trees. The only one that does that. Now, where we do have to clear it for some of the lots, time will bring trees back to those areas as well. People like trees and they generally want them to stay. But this lot and this subdivision belongs in this area, and it's a good development for this area. This is a comparison to Cedar Point. Commissioner McWilliams, I watched the Cedar Point hearing. Some of the same issues in that case came up here in terms of road improvements. And I was impressed with a lot of the questions that you asked at that hearing. I want to make a comparison because that's a subdivision that your all's commission approved, and that was with a zoning change when you had discretion, not in this type of case. The number of lots in that development was more than ours, 25% more, 102 lots. We're 80. Their total acreage was 32.7 acres. We're almost 80 acres. More acres, less lots. The open space, they had 6 acres. We have 45. Price point's roughly the same. Their testimony was 300 to 500. Ours is going to be 350 to 500. It's hard to give a definitive number on that because it comes down to building costs, which are going to be more than a year away. In addition, we don't know what amenities people will ask for. Road type, this is Commissioner McWilliams, this was the issue in that case. That Cedar Creek is a quote-unquote a collector road. That's a classification on the, it's referred to as the functional classification from 2010. From the best I could understand, that's never been adopted by fiscal court. It was adopted by the Planning Commission, but it's never been adopted by fiscal court. It also is not named in the subdivision regulations, so I don't think it even applies. I think what your engineer has talked about in terms of road improvements is reasonable and the correct way of looking at that. If anybody looks at any of these roads, particularly Goshen, there's no way in the world that meets any classification close to a collector. The 2010 report, which you all have gotten hung up on in the past, that is a future hope of where that road might go if it develops the way I think the people in that report expected. And that's the development we're bringing today. It's not there yet, but that is where it's headed, and it's expected development. The road width in that case was 18 feet. It did not have curb and gutters. Now, Goshen has various widths. If you get next to 42, it's over 30 feet. It's a little bit smaller as you get to Valley. At some point, finally, as you get to Valley and you get to the first hard turn on the Z as you approach our development, it goes to 18 feet with curb and gutter. So already in that area, it's larger. When you get beyond that point, it's smaller. And in some places, there's no curb and gutter. In some places, it's grossly inept. I'll admit it. I mean, it goes down to 15, 16 feet in a lot of areas. And it's not really in good condition. And it does have sharp turns. I don't know how buses and traffic gets past it now. But what we have proposed is that we'll improve all those areas around those curves to the beginning of our subdivision, which is also the entrance to Taylor Creek, to 18 feet plus curb and gutter. That matches what the county has currently done. That's more than what was done on Cedar Point. And it's fully in line with your regulations. The regulations, in my opinion, will be looked at it, they were wrong. And I think the way you're looking at it now is the correct way to look at it. Also, in road improvements, in that case, the only thing you all required was to put a strip down the middle, not even on the sides, for about a quarter-mile length. An inexpensive and paltry improvement was all that was required in a zoning change. In this case, and I don't think, we're not required to do this, we're going well beyond that voluntarily. We're going to put nearly $1 million of road improvements to expand what is a completely deficient road that goes down to 15 feet without curb and gutters to 18 feet with curb and gutters, and to improve those curbs. And that's what we're going to do. It's a significant contribution to what you'll have currently, and it makes the area much better and much safer. I'm not going to spend time on these pictures. Amy, I think, did a good job on that, and there's so many things to cover, I don't want to waste much time on it. If you all do have any specific questions about the pictures of the road, I'll come back. But the fact is, once you get past the first hard turn, that's where the road becomes grossly insufficient. Our traffic impact study, I have Diane Zimmerman here to give some testimony on that, so I'm going to bring her up now.
Okay. Morning.
Good morning. My name is Diane Zimmerman. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Kentucky. My address is 12803 High Meadows Pike in Prospect, Kentucky. I did prepare the traffic impact study that you have in your packet. I want to point out that this development would generate 62 AM peak hour trips and 82 PM peak hour trips. And again, this is less than the requirement for submitting a traffic impact study of 100 trips. And the daily number, which was reviewed earlier, of 847. The results of the traffic impact study are that the intersection at US 42 and Goshen Lane, which it will operate at level service A on US 42. The southbound approach, which is the Goshen Lane approaching US 42, will operate at level service C and B in the PM peak hour, and all the other intersections will continue to operate at level service A and B, which leads me to the conclusion, that I do want to point out that the coming out of the Goshen store currently operates at level service D and will go to level service E in the future. This is partially due to the small number of trips on this side of the road, and it is not significant in evaluating the capacity of Goshen Lane specifically. And the only other location that changes in its level service is Goshen Lane at Cliffwood. Therefore, the conclusion is that there would be a minimal impact to the existing highway network. No capacity deficiencies were identified during the study, and therefore no improvements are required or recommended to provide additional capacity. And I kind of want to go back to the US 42 and the left turn lane warrants, and we had this conversation in July on another case about that the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet guidelines for improving intersections are based on the need to provide additional capacity. The fact that this intersection is operating at level service A and C would not make it a candidate for improvements in the future.
Diane, I just have a couple of questions going back to the level of service.
But if you could get a little closer to the microphone.
Sure, thank you very much. Diane, on the level of service, there's two in red. Those are the only two intersections that are changed at all as a result of this development, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the only one that drops below level of service C is the Goshen store northbound, correct?
That is correct.
And you mentioned that's not significant. Can you explain in detail why that is not a significant intersection?
This movement is not significant because of the, land use that it's serving and the amount of traffic trying to exit. The PM peak specifically, I have the number, I can look up the AM, but it was 11 cars exiting. So 11 cars are going to spend an average of 30 seconds. To me, that's not significant. If it was 200 cars waiting 30 seconds, that we're starting to discuss something that's significant, but 11 vehicles exiting there is, makes it less significant.
Thank you. Just to add one more comment on that. It's not, if you had more cars, it's a low rating because you have so few cars. So if one car has to sit there a long time, if you had 10 cars behind them that all got through the intersection, the average would drop well below a C. And it's just significant. It's high on the level of service because you do not have any cars going through there effectively. 11 cars during rush hour, it's just not a significant intersection to be considered. In terms of the road, our improvements, this slide shows the right-of-way. We've got 60 feet of right-of-way width. This is the overview, and you saw this same slide with your engineer, with Jim Silliman. We've got A, and I'm going to go through these improvements. A is actually closer to our development entrance. C is when you get closer to a US 42. So perhaps I should have done it in the other order, but that's the order that we have. This shows the number A. This is the one that's in front of our entrance. The top of that red line is Plantation Boulevard, and that goes to the first turn. Again, it'll be 18 feet with curb and gutters. It'll effectively be 21 feet entire length. Currently, it's roughly, and it varies in areas, but it's roughly about 15 and a half feet in that stretch. When you get beyond that Plantation Boulevard, I think it even gets smaller. It gets to 13 feet. And it gets, I think, somebody might even said it gets maybe to 10 or 9 feet, depending on how far down the road you get. One of the questions, or one of the things you all talked about in the Cedar Point was you did not want to have hourglass shapes to the road where they cinch in at areas and they get wider at areas because it's a traffic and safety hazard. There's no question this would be a big safety hazard because there's no obligation for us to improve the road all the way down to Rose Island Road and any past our development. And so if you're going to have 18-foot roads with curb and gutter, or let's say 20-foot roads, and then you cinch down to 13 feet, the last thing you want, you would encourage speed, and people would catch the road unexpectedly, particularly people who wouldn't know it. That's not what you want to do, and you all made the finding in that other case last year specifically not to do that, and we would suggest that you follow that same rationale in this case. This is between the two sharp turns. Again, this goes about 15.7 feet. Actually, I think part of it gets a little bit wider around the first turn, but it does cinch down pretty good. One of the questions, in addition to not want to make it too wide because you increase speed, and it would be our opinion, you really don't want to increase speed in this area on this road at all. You want to keep a modest speed. The other thing is some of these homes have pine trees. I mean, not terribly valuable trees in dollar value, but I think valuable to those homeowners. If we expand the road too wide, we probably would have to take those trees out, and we don't want to do that. And I don't think, if you ask them honestly, my guess is they tell you they don't want us to do that either. And then this is the additional part going towards Valley Drive. Your engineer said to make the improvements all the way to Valley Drive. Valley Drive is already 18 feet plus curb and gutter effectively to where this map starts. So what I would suggest is that we're 18 foot. If it's already built out, we don't have to increase it. What we're trying to do is match the improvements that the county made up to this point to keep the road at the same distance that it is currently. And we will put that into binding element as well. And just so the people behind me, some of the people are not lawyers, they're not council people. Binding elements effectively, as you all know, are like deed restrictions. They run with the land, but different from a deed restriction, it's enforceable with the government. People can come to you all and come to their the regulators and get them to enforce the regulations if we put it into our binding elements. It's even more powerful. This is the two curves. In addition to making the general road 18 feet plus curb and gutter. These are the curves, and there's lots of question about what to do about those. Right now, you have bus traffic using it. Bus traffic is navigating all of these turns, and you heard the testimony, there's not been any issues with that. But with our road improvements at the first turn, this is again further away, this is the one closer to our entrance, further away from 42. The width would go to about 31 feet. And what you see on that drawing is two buses can get by each other within their own lanes with the width that we would be proposing. I don't think you want to go much larger than that, and honestly, I don't think you really want to. I don't think you want to bank the road or the turns. All you're going to do is unnecessarily increase speed, and nobody really wants that. What you do want is people to have safe passage, and the buses being able to do that means cars could do that even easier. This is the other intersection. This is the one closer to 42, not intersection. I'm sorry, curve closer to 42. This is kind of down by the lodge. If you're familiar with that home, it's the one with. It's kind of a neat-looking house. It looks like a lodge, with the balcony that goes all the way around it. That would be 30 feet. So to the extent we're 18 feet, as you come off these curves, we'll actually be beyond that until we cinch down at a safe level. The other thing is fire protection, water capacity, water pressure. Your all's code says 270.060. It says residential developments with lots under 1 acre were required to have 750 gallons of pressure per minute. Fire hydrants are also required. That's what your code says. Right now, you all don't have that. This is a letter from Chris Keel. I'm sorry, this is a letter from Anthony Hewitt from the water company. And he's here today if you want to ask him any questions. At least he was here a few minutes ago. I think he's still here. And he has said that we could get water pressure built up to this area. And why is water pressure important? Of course, it's important. People have water pressure when they're watering the lawn, taking a shower. But more importantly, it's important for fire prevention. Right now, it's inadequate. It's 450 to 500 gallons per minute. That is the water pressure now. Anybody that's interested in safety, honestly interested in safety, should want this development to take place. We will put an 8-inch grid tie-in with the Louisville Water Company. We agree to put that in a binding element, and that will increase flows to 750 gallons a minute, or to 750 minimum, perhaps up to 800 gallons per minute. So we're going to easily improve the safety for the fire prevention. Additionally, our roads being improved. I mean, it doesn't just make it easier for buses to get back and forth. It makes it better for fire trucks to get back and forth, ambulances to get through there. And all of those things, if anybody looks at the road the way it is now, could be a problem today. School capacity standards. This is another one of the check the boxes that we've got to go through. It was recently reformulated. The Oldham County School Board adopted the campus capacity worksheet. It's reviewed annually, so I believe it was just reviewed again for accuracy and relevancy. The averages, it averages the combined school capacity serving the campus and applies the multipliers. This is what we received from your school superintendent, and to close in, it shows they check the box. Capacity is adequate to accommodate the number of students generated by this development. Now, some people may say, well, you can look at the things different ways. Well, if we came in as applicants and said, if we didn't satisfy your capacity standards, but then said, well, you should just look at your capacity standards in a different way, we qualify under that. If you adjust the way you're going to look at it, that wouldn't be fair for us to do it. And it's not fair for others to do to us. The rules are the rules. They were put in by fiscal court, adopted by you all, and we are following them. At the TRC and today, based on 80 lots, we net 38 students under the calculations. Those would attend Harmony, North Oldham Middle School, and North Oldham High School. The capacity with the build is 94.12% capacity, and that allows us to have 35 building permits per year. We can't build out all 80 the first year. We can't do that. But we should be able, under the mathematical calculations, build out 35. Environmental, they were asked about karst features. The soil and erosion permit will require study of the karst features. Now, Commissioner Douglas, that is not required at this stage. We're just at a preliminary subdivision plan. It is required before you go to record plat, and we will have that. The Army Corps of Engineers permits, if they're required for the jurisdictional waters, if they're required, we'll do it. We absolutely will do it. And we have Ron, gosh, I brought the letter and I don't have it in front of me. I should know his name, from Red Wing, who's written a letter, Ron Thomas. And I'd like to submit that letter for the record, if you all don't mind. I'll put the letter right here. Not sure how to get that on the floor, but he's here to answer any questions.
Amy, would you turn that on if you get a minute?
If there's any other agencies such as Fish and Wildlife, if they're required, we will do them. I don't think those are required, but if they are, we will follow them. Sewer capacity, this is not my area. We're going to bring up Eric Sen, he's with Land Design and Development, to touch on some of these topics.
Okay. We'll just need your name and address, please, for the record.
Erickson, engineer, land design development, 503 Washburn Avenue. Currently, this is our site. The greens where you see we're proposing to build sanitary sewers. All these sewers will be gravity, and they will be gravity to the Pebble Point pump station down, as you see on the lower left-hand side. And as Kevin Gibson explained, there is capacity at that pump station, as well as the treatment plant that pump station is pumping to. In regards to drainage, just kind of give an overview. This is the watershed area for the creek that runs underneath Rose Island Road to the Rivers Landing Lake. This is approximately 1,500 acres. Remind you, we're 80 acres, and with 34 of that acres being developed, so we're just probably approximately 2% of this entire watershed. This exhibit shows the watershed coming underneath Goshen Lane. You can see our development is downstream of this, so we won't be impacting the drainage to Goshen Lane at all. And this exhibit shows where we propose 3 detention basins. Each of these are located in the draws, the natural draws. We are agreeing to over-detain by 20% of each of these to helping kind of mitigation with the peak flows. And again, there's been concern about the drainage in Goshen Lane at the entrance. We've agreed to go ahead and look at that, analyze that, and figure out what we need to do to improve that as well. These are some aerial views from Google Earth for the Rivers Landing Lake. I know there's been concerns about flooding in this lake. On the left, you see from 2017, these are your normal situations. In 2018, this is during the February where we had the flooding. But you can see, zoom in here, it looks like the Ohio River is basically the same level as the Rivers Landing Lake. So what I believe is happening is the outlet for this lake, does it work? Yeah, right there. These creeks, these ditches, and everything is backing up from the Ohio River, and it's backing up to this lake. And instead of that water being able to get out of Rivers Landing, it's actually backing up into the lake. So it's not actually the drainage coming from underneath Rose Island Road that's causing this issue here. It's actually the Ohio River backing up, forcing it back into the lake.
That's not true.
Sir, we'll have an opportunity to hear from y'all later.
All right, again, a little zoomed in of that area, the Rivers Landing Lake. You can see, it looks like everything's probably right at the same elevation it is on the Ohio River.
Thank you, Eric. Just to follow up on that, I mean, to the extent we will drain into the Rivers Landing Lake, to the extent that that lake has had any issues with water, we are a small contributor under any way you look at it. 34 acres out of a watershed of over 1,000. A very small contributor to that. We cannot control when there is a record rainfall in our community of Louisville that breaks records that are over 100 years old. That's what happened in February of this year. When that happens, it's not just Rivers Landing Lake that's going to have problems. It's areas all over our city that are going to have problems, particularly ones that are by the river. We can't control that, but what we can do is make it emphasize to you all, we are not the ones creating those issues. Those are issues that people have to deal with, the infrastructure has to deal with, but they're not caused by this development. This development is insignificant in the big realm of things. I wanted to show some of the renderings of the homes. Surprisingly enough, when we had both of our neighborhood meetings, I gotta be honest with you, no one was even interested in seeing the homes. Usually that's the biggest thing they want to see, which further made it evident to me that people were simply against this project, period, because they just don't want anything next to them. That's not fair to us, and it's not appropriate. But these are the homes. They're very, very nice looking homes, and they fit the area, and they fit the marketplace currently. Some people want us to build lots that were marketed 30 years ago. We don't do that. You market homes that are buildable now. And this is the type of home that's being built all over the country with smaller lots. Most people nowadays, they want areas of a protected environment. They want areas where they have less yard to take care of, but they still have access to open space areas. And that's what this subdivision provides. And that's what why your open space subdivision regulations were drafted, particularly to have this type of nice development in your all's community. The last thing I want to do in closing is, as I mentioned, this is a ministerial decision. I've been accused of a lot of things from some of the opposition in this case. I've been accused of trying not to be transparent, trying to hide things, trying to push things through. I take some offense to that because it's not true. In this case, we had not only one, as I mentioned, we had 2 meetings, more than we're required. We invited not just the first tier, which again is all we're required to do. We invited more than the second tier to that meeting, well over the requirements of what we're supposed to do. This gives you a map of shows so you can actually see who we invited. You can see up here we invite the people, some of the people from Taylor's Creek. And while we didn't send a letter to every single resident in there, we did send it to the head of the neighborhood association. So trust me, they were all aware of it. And then around here, particularly when you get around Settlers Point, we went well beyond of where we're supposed to go and where we're required to go. This just gives you, I'll go through these quickly. Let me get rid of that. This shows some of the names of people who signed in. And a lot of people didn't even sign in. This is not everybody that was at these meetings. But a lot of people came, and some people wrote notes to us on the sign-in sheet. So we more than covered what's required. The traffic study, you heard Ms. Wall tell you, we're not required to have a traffic study. We did the traffic study before we filed. We started to do it. Now, one of the people in opposition, one of the letters said we were changing the study. The study was getting updated. It was a work in progress, but we did that. We provided the very first meeting the information we had, and to the extent there were any changes, none of it changed significantly or materially. It changed slightly on the fringes, but the overall message and conclusions of it did not change at all. This shows the traffic impact study. This is in your code. It says it will not be required if you only have 20 peak hour trips and or 1,500 average daily trips. You saw from Ms. Wall we're at 847 daily trips. If you include what's already there, you're still under 1,500. We were not required to have a traffic study. The traffic study you're required to have over 100 peak hour trips. We're below that number or greater than 2,000 ADT. We're below that number as well. This is the thing I mentioned at the very beginning. Any preliminary plan does not require a public hearing if you're not asking for any substantive changes. We're not asking for waivers. We're not asking for variances. We comply with all of those things. In CO1, we comply with all the setback restrictions in that zoning district. In R2, we comply with all the setback standards of that zoning district. We've not asked for any. We're here for a preliminary subdivision plan, which is a ministerial act. I think we've prepared a very good plan. I think it's appropriate for this area. I think the number of lots is a reasonable number of lots, and it's done in a careful and environmentally sensitive way. And if you remember from the lot yield plan, if we did a plan under those scenarios, the clearing would be much more significant. You'll have open space subdivisions to preserve this type of property. It belongs in this type of area. It's the next step on the progression going down Goshen Avenue, or Goshen Drive. And that's all my presentation. Thank you all very much. I'll reserve, I guess, the rest of my time for rebuttal and any questions for me. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. All right, before we move into the next section, which is testimony and questioning by those opposing the application, I'd like to ask, is there anyone here that would like to speak in support of this application? Anyone here to speak in support of? Okay, seeing no one get up, we will now move into testimony and question by those opposing the application. And as the applicant just had, you have 50 minutes. So we'll get your all's name and address, and then we'll, And then if there's anybody that's going to testify, we'll get them sworn in at the same time. Wait just a second here, we'll had a little trouble with our clock, so.
Okay, got it. When they start, I'll start it.
Okay, thank you. And if we could, get your name and address, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My name's Clay Barkley. I'm at 12,007 Locust Lane in Anchorage, Kentucky. I represent the Goshen Lane Preservation Group and the Taylor Creek Woods Homeowners Association. First, I want to thank the Commission for the opportunity to speak here today, and I want to thank the staff, Jim Urban and Amy, because they've been very helpful through this whole process, and the Oldham County Engineer's Office has been very helpful as well.
Before you get started, let me ask if you know who will be speaking.
Yes.
If we could get them sworn in.
Sure.
And then, we'll have an opportunity, if there's time left, to let folks in the audience to.
I'm going
also.
to try to be as brief as possible. I think there's a lot of people who probably want to talk, so should probably swear them all in at the same time, I guess.
Okay. All right, who all would like to be sworn in? If you would, stand up. Okay.
Do you
Ms.
solemnly
Knight?
swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay. Thank you.
So basically, this development, we believe, is the wrong development in the wrong location. There's been a lot of statements made about how this is going to be an environmentally friendly development, and we think that just isn't the case. The other argument is that this is manufactured opposition. I see we have over 400 petitioners who've signed our petition in opposition. We have 5 homeowners associations at least who have entered resolutions, and I don't see anyone speaking in favor other than folks who are counseling. So, this is a democratic process. If they were organized, I think you shouldn't dock points from them. This is a grassroots effort. There's a lot of people from a lot of different areas in Goshen and Oldham County who are very concerned about this development. So this is basically the site. You've seen this before. It's almost entirely forested. If we go back to the original photo, you can sort of see that this is, a steep slope along Little Huckleberry Creek, and this is a source of some of the environmental issues. I won't go into detail, but these are largely 1-acre lots. This is just a few photos. I think this is actually on the site. This is Little Huckleberry Creek, and it's basically 1-acre lots or larger. It's very agricultural, consistent with the land use plan for the Oldham County Comprehensive Plan. So you've also seen this map. Basically, there's about half of this property is zoned CO1, conservation, and half of the property is zoned R2. The developer is using an open space provision of the subdivision regulations, basically that allows you to enhance the number of lots you can put on a site to 120%. We basically think that the intent of conservation zoning is to protect significant natural features, wooded areas, and water courses. It's to minimize erosion of soil and siltation and pollution of streams and lakes, and it requires a minimum lot area of 1 acre. There are no exceptions in the zoning ordinance for cluster zoning or open space zoning or lot size averaging. To the extent that that's been put in place, our legal argument is that it needs to be an exception to CO1 zoning. Because effectively what you're doing here is you are putting way more lots on this particular location than is appropriate for conservation zoning. If you look at the plan, you see some of the results of putting far too many lots and too small of lots on this location. Again, these folks are not NIMBYs. You know, if this was a reasonable development with 1 acre lots, I think that there would be some support. But particularly because you have so many lots and so much drainage, you have to put in 1, 2, 3 detention ponds. Those detention ponds, one of is in a jurisdictional stream for which the applicant will have to obtain Clean Water Act permits. If this were reasonable and smaller and consistent with CO1 zoning, then you wouldn't have to have all of this infrastructure in the streams. In addition, this sewer is going to have to, we know that there's going to have to be blasting to put this sewer in place, which, you know, we feel is problematic. Essentially, this is the wrong development in the wrong place. Now, the zoning ordinance basically, as I said, doesn't allow any exceptions. It says the minimum lot areas shall not be reduced, consistent with these regulations. There are no exceptions. And under Kentucky law, the zoning ordinance basically trumps the subdivision regulations. Here you see side by side the development plan and the zoning map, and you'll see that there are 57 lots, which is, they set out here in their subdivision plat, 57 lots on CO1 zoning. Those lots are some less than the 12,000 square feet that are provided for in R2. All of them are less than an acre. Most of them are less than a half an acre. We simply believe that this is inconsistent with the purpose of both the comp plan, the zoning ordinance under conservation zoning, and even the subdivision regulations, frankly. So, from our perspective, if you don't provide the minimum lots of 1 acre for CO1 zoning in this particular section of this parcel, then you cannot meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. So the applicant fails. In addition, the subdivision regulations relate back to the zoning ordinance, and the subdivision regulations say you have to follow the zoning ordinance. And an open space subdivision is not intended to allow development densities greater than what is allowed in a conventional subdivision, or to allow increased densities using land with marginal development potential. That's exactly what's happening. What we're doing is we're saying, developer, you can basically create all this open space in areas that otherwise aren't developable. There's steep slopes, there's karst, there's jurisdictional streams. So those areas would never be developed in the first place. So we're giving them some incentive and not getting anything back. And, you know, in addition, just briefly to talk about, well, if we give you a road and we give you, you know, some infrastructure, then you ought to take it. Well, I don't think that's right. I think that we deserve good roads, and you shouldn't have to destroy streams, and you shouldn't have to destroy this particular conservation zone parcel in order to do it. Here is the basically environmental conditions plan that was provided by the developer. You can see the yellow parts of the plan are steep slopes of 20%. These pink areas are 30%. So there is significant steep slopes. There are 3 karst areas right along this line. Some of that I think is going to have homes on, but frankly we don't know because the developer didn't overlay this particular map with a subdivision plat, which they're required to do under the subdivision regulations. So even if you look at the subdivision regulations, we don't think that the density is less than or equal to conventional subdivision, which is required by the regulations. We don't, to your point, Mr. Douglas, we don't think that environmentally sensitive areas have been identified and located on the subdivision plat. There's an argument that this is all ministerial, that you don't have any discretion. Well, that's just not true. You have a lot of discretion. You have the discretion to ask them to do a general statement describing the nature of environmentally sensitive areas and how they're going to deal with that and how they're going to make the residents of this community safe. You have that not only discretion, you have that obligation. In addition, going back to, let me go up, each individual open space shall not generate an ADT that exceeds 250 vehicles. That clearly hasn't been done in this case. The idea behind an open space provision is that they're small. You know, this was done in New England in order to protect agricultural land. And what you do is you say, don't develop on this farm, and we'll let you develop more densely in this location. It's really not supposed to be done in a place where you have 840 ADT and you're gonna, you know, kill 3 jurisdictional streams on that parcel. In addition, we think that the connector road, under the regulations, an adjoining private road should be extended if they're going to do it and widened all the way to Rose Island Road. Otherwise, and our traffic engineer will talk about that in a moment. Going back, the comp plan. This subdivision application is not consistent with the comp plan. This is the particular site, and it is basically a future land use of agricultural, which contemplates 1-acre lots. There are not 1-acre lots on this location. In opposition, there are, as I said, 434 residents. There's 5 HOAs from Goshen Hills, Taylor Creek Woods, Rivers Landing, Trails Inn, and Longwood. And they have questions that need to be answered about traffic safety, about infrastructure, stormwater runoff and pollutants, karst, a whole host of other issues, school overcrowding, and developer construction compliance. You know, this is a very environmentally sensitive area, and this developer has been in Oldham County, and they've been cited. They've had stop work orders for failure to provide proper erosion control measures. Here's a few pictures in the last 3 years of some of that. I don't know, when you get into steep slopes in this particular site and the fact that they have to blast all the way down to Huckleberry Creek, I have to imagine it's going to be worse than this. Now, this is just what the road looks like today, and I'm going to let our traffic engineer come up, Adam Kirk, and address some of those issues. I assume questions would be after.
Well, it can be, but you're down to 38 minutes, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adam Kirk, with Adam Kirk Engineering, 137 McClellan Springs Drive, Georgetown, Kentucky.
Are you in?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll
If you
stand.
can speak up.
Yes, sir. Okay, so my name is Adam Kirk, again with Adam Kirk Engineering, and I was asked to review both the traffic impact study as well as look at the geometry of the roadway. When we look at the traffic impact study, we don't really have any issues with it. What the impact study did is it looked at the capacity of the roadway and the capacity of the intersection and said that there is adequate capacity essentially at the major intersections to get traffic through. However, the subdivision regulations state that the traffic impact study is there to both look at capacity of the roadway as well as the traffic safety of the roadway. And that's where we feel that it didn't necessarily go to look at how safe is this roadway, how has it been performing, and then how is it going to perform with an additional 847 vehicles on it a day. And so that's what we did. We looked at the crash analysis. We also did a geometric review of the site. So over 3 years, 2016, 17, and 18, we identified 7 crashes on this roadway, which is a very low volume roadway, so 7 crashes is a relatively significant number through here. When you look at the types of crashes we've got, 4 single vehicle crashes. A single vehicle crash is when you're driving along the roadway and you just run off the roadway. It's because there's geometric changes, maybe like an S-curve that you can see here and here, where we've got 2 crashes. Because the radius around those curves is too tight, that if you're traveling 20 miles an hour, you have to slow down significantly in order to negotiate that turn. There's also sight distance restrictions to where you can't necessarily see where that curve is, and if you're not familiar with here, if you're say visiting, that's a very sharp curve to make if you don't know it's there. So you have to slow down to about 13 miles an hour in order to negotiate through that curve. So that is one of the primary problems we see. The other types of crash are sideswipe crashes. It's not surprising we've got a 16-foot wide roadway. A car is generally 7 feet wide. That doesn't leave a whole lot of room for error when you're negotiating through here. One of the primary contributors to that too is we've got restricted sight distance at some of these curves to where you can't see another car coming in order to get out the way, which also contributes to the crashes. Additionally, I'd like to point out that there is a fatal crash. There's a single vehicle crash. It happened just beyond, you can see it right here, just beyond Plantation Boulevard. It's about half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile past there. There's a vertical crest you come up over, and there's a sharp curve to the right with limited sight distance, and there's a tree at the bottom of that, and there was a fatal crash there last year. So these are roadways that need to be addressed, and we're glad that the applicant is looking at that. However, we think that it doesn't necessarily go far enough. Number one, we mentioned sight distance, or stopping sight distance. Stopping sight distance just says that when you're driving along a roadway, the minimum requirement you have is that you've got to be able to see so far in front of you so that if there's an object in the roadway, if there's another car coming at you, if, say, a person is walking, you have adequate time to stop. The speed limit on the roadway is 25 miles an hour, and it takes about 155 feet traveling 25 miles an hour to see something, react to it, and stop before you hit an object. The design speed for a collector roadway such as this, based on the subdivision regulations, is 35 miles an hour. At 35 miles an hour, you need 270 feet in order to stop. At two locations along this roadway, we've got about 70 feet of stopping sight distance. At the S curve, at both of those 90-degree curves, because of the vegetation and the geography around it, you cannot see more than 70 feet in front of you. That means that if there's an object in the roadway, if somebody's walking in the roadway, if there's a car coming at you, you cannot stop before you hit that object, that person walking, or that car. And so that is one of the significant safety problems that we saw in here. To give you an idea of what that looks like, these are the two curves. The one on the left is the first curve you approach coming from 42, and then the one on the right is the other curve. And we have about 70 feet of sight distance. This curve is has a radius of 65 feet, and so that means that you have to be going about 13 miles an hour in order to negotiate on a roadway where people are traveling about 25 miles an hour.
Mr. Kirk, just to remind you that there's a lot of folks that want to speak.
Yes, sir, and I'm going as fast as I can. And one last thing, Goshen Lane from Plantation Boulevard to Rose Island goes down to 11 feet or less. The same sight distance restrictions we've got, the same poor geometry and vertical curvature that we've got. It's also the side of the fatal crash. If you look at the traffic impact study, it did not say any traffic's going to be going out this way. But if we build 80 homes, there is undeniably going to be increased traffic on this section of the roadway, and that should be improved as well. That's all I will say, and turn it over to everybody else that has a chance to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa LaRocca is going to speak next.
Yes.
And just name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Lisa LaRocca. I live at 2201 Goshen Lane, just north of the proposed development. My property aligns Goshen Lane. I operate and manage two businesses from my location. They are Extraordinary Events and Goshen Crest Farm, and also our nonprofit foundation, Kentuckiana Cancer Research Foundation. First of all, I would like to clarify a statement that Mr. Talbot made during his testimony today. I do operate and manage Goshen Crest Farm, and he spoke to that earlier. I would like to state that Mr. Talbot does not know my business. He does not understand my business. He is not a part of the board. He is not a member of Goshen Crest Farm, and he has never worked with us on an event. So I find it rather interesting that he stands here today and wants to quote some of our policies and procedures. So I would like for everyone on the commission to please take that into consideration as well. And regardless, I don't believe that Goshen Crest Farm is the focus today. I believe we're here to talk about Pulte Goshen and moving forward. This is a grassroots operation. It all started with a notice in my mailbox in mid-November. The neighbors were mobilized. In fact, I didn't attend the first meeting. I think we received the notice less than 7 days in advance. I had plans, as did my husband, so we were brought up to speed by other neighbors in our community. I have served as the communications director for this effort. I am proud to say that I did that. I would do it again. I think that the residents needed someone to help them to stay in touch, to come together, and we needed organized meetings. And I have a right to defend my home, my neighborhood, and most importantly, my quality of life. And I feel like that's what's in jeopardy today, and I think that's what we have to consider when we're looking at this development moving forward. With regard to my business, I just want to bring up something that hasn't been talked about yet, but will be spoken about in the testimony that you're going to hear. We have Silica Broadband on Goshen Lane. This is a high-speed fiber-optic infrastructure network that the residents along Goshen Lane, Taylor Creek Woods, paid out of our own pockets to install so we could have a high-speed internet service. Prior to that, we had substandard service by AT&T, a national company, one that it's my understanding that Pulte probably has a relationship with and will work with on the new subdivision. But anyway, there were times that I would be out of internet service and telephone service for up to 10 days when we have storms and substandard equipment. One of the common issues that happened, the rats crawled into the box and chewed the wires. So the rats were electrocuted and I had no telephone, which meant I couldn't operate my business. So there was many days that I would operate at Starbucks. I have 8 clients that I do social media for. So if I don't have high quality internet access 24/7, my business is shut down. So that's an important concern. So when we start thinking about widening the road and deforesting of this land and doing our construction, we have to think about what happens to the internet service that we have. In regard to the 80 homes that is planned, it does double the immediate area. We currently have roughly 60 homes in that area, and that starts at the lodge that's been referenced and going to my property on Goshen Lane. So that's roughly 60 homeowners today. So when you put 80 houses, that doubles the amount of people there. So it will increase traffic. I think we'd all be stupid if we said it didn't increase the traffic. So that also means that traffic patterns will change. When we have traffic congestion, accidents, construction, yes, residents at Taylor Creek Woods, they're going to turn the opposite way and they're going to take the northern part of Goshen Lane. That's where my property is. That's been ignored. The developer seems to think that our problem stops at Plantation Boulevard. It doesn't. The fatality happened right by my property. I walk out and get my mail every day, and you know what I look at? A tree. It's a memorial to this young 17-year-old woman that lost her life in a fiery crash. She burned in the car, burned to a crisp, because Goshen Lane is not safe. So think about that. When you're thinking about, oh, we're doing great, we're widening the road, we're not widening the entire road. We're ignoring a very large portion of the road. Then we talk about the numerous adverse environmental effects. We rely on gardening as a source for our food over the summer and the fall. It's one of my hobbies. It's something that I like, taking classes and so forth. So we practice organic gardening. What's going to happen with all of this runoff? Sure, we have detention basins, and sure, we're told that they're going to be adequate, but deforesting of that site is going to cause erosion. We're going to have blasting for sewer infrastructure, correct? So what's going to happen to Little Huckleberry Creek and the runoff and the water that's coming to my property? And the important thing is, too, I drink well water. I don't have Louisville water at my property. I think I'm probably the only one on Goshen Lane. So here's a question that everyone needs to ponder today. Is my water going to be safe to drink when this construction process starts? Will it be safe to drink? Will it be safe for me to feed, to serve to my 3 grandchildren? That's a question that I have. And is it safe for me to water my organic gardening plants that I'm growing when I'm consuming my food in the summer months? And then lastly, we have to talk about the integrity of Pulte homes. There is a $4.3 million lawsuit with the Environmental Protection Agency in 2008. Granted, that was 11 years ago. But the thing that I think is important about this, it was the Environmental Protection Agency. It wasn't Oldham County. It wasn't the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It was the Environmental Protection Agency, and it spanned over 34 states. And that runs parallel with what our concerns are, and that is a complete disregard for stormwater runoff. And as we know, there are several stop work order violations in the files from the projects in LaGrange. So I think that has to be considered. It seems like it might be a pattern. It happened in 2008 and they got a big slap on the wrist and had to pay a lot of money. but they did it again here in Oldham County, right in our backyard. So we have to think about that. Additionally, there's multiple comments online about the developer and their unsatisfactory building practices and failure to solve homeowner concerns. We're very concerned about that as well. Many homeowners in the developments in LaGrange contacted us, but they did not want to be singled out. So, in closing, I have to respectfully ask each of you to carefully consider what's been presented to you today. You have the facts from Pulte, and you have the facts from our attorney. But we, as people, your taxpaying citizens in Oldham County, I think we're your most valuable resource. Goshen Lane is a valuable natural resource in this community, and I'm asking you to respectfully protect us from this fallout that this development could bring. Thank you.
Herb Hurst.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name's Herb Hurst, and I reside at 12103 Plantation Boulevard in the Taylor Creek subdivision, which is off Goshen Lane. I've resided at this address for over 27 years, and I'm currently the president of the Taylor Creek Woods Homeowners Association. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a few of our major concerns with the proposed Pulte subdivision with you, and a full text of my remarks can be found in your packets. It was transmitted to Ms. Alvey on December 28th. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the major points from that text. Please remember while I'm making my remarks that we currently have about 70 residents along Goshen Lane in the portion we're referencing today. And if Pulte's proposed development adds maybe 80 more homes, it will more than double the residences, and it will more than double the vehicular traffic in that portion of Goshen Lane. Our number one concern as residents of that area is public safety of vehicle and pedestrian traffic on Goshen Lane due to increased traffic from added residents of the proposed subdivision. Goshen Lane is primarily a rural one-lane road, and significantly from about 1500 Goshen Lane through the 90-degree S-curves and all the way northbound to Rose Island Road has significant hazards to traffic. All of Goshen Lane is used by pedestrians walking dogs, by runners. Several bicycle clubs from both Jefferson and Oldham County train for the Ironman out there, and it's not a road that's warranted for additional traffic. The developer's intention to widen the road to 21 feet, including curbs, is not going to provide sufficient widening and safety improvements needed in many of the hazardous areas, especially through those 90-degree S-curves where the sight lines are impaired by the terrain and the sharpness of the turns. Road improvement construction that's done simultaneously with the subdivision construction as Pulte's proposed is going to hinder current residents' ability to use Goshen Lane southbound to access Highway 42. And if that traffic reroutes to the northbound sections of Goshen Lane, the safety issues increase exponentially because of the nature of the northbound road. Major improvements are needed at the intersection of Goshen Lane and Highway 42 to handle increased traffic. And when Goshen Lane is closed southbound towards 42, the only emergency access to current homes is by utilizing the northern portion coming up from Cardinal Harbor. There's no disputing that this is an unsafe one-car secondary exit and entrance. I'd like to touch on school capacity. A lot of our residents have younger children that attend our North Oldham schools. While North Oldham High School has some remaining capacity and the campus is within constraints, this is not true of North Oldham Elementary, Harmony Elementary. Reassignment of Harmony Elementary students to the less crowded Goshen Elementary at Hillcrest has already occurred in an effort to keep Harmony below 100% capacity. And the school board already knows that the next round of reassignments, if it's needed, will bus young students living east of Goshen Lane to other area schools. I'd like to touch for a minute on water pressure concerns. The current homes in the Goshen Lane area have experienced and still do experience low and at times inadequate water pressure. This condition is primarily due to aging infrastructure that was inherited from the old Goshen Water Company. While the fire district has commented that they have adequate pressure and supply within the proposed subdivision under the Pulte plan, they did not express the same confidence for homes on the east side of Goshen Lane. And my last item to bring up is the fiber-optic infrastructure that runs along Goshen Lane. Taylor Creek Woods residents partnered with a private local company, Silica Broadband, to capitalize and develop high-speed fiber-optic infrastructure north along Goshen Lane and then into our homes. Any disruption of this service will negatively impact residents who now are able to work from home and run their own business ventures from their homes. So we, as fellow Oldham County residents, respectfully ask that you deny this Pulte application. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
On Nana Lambton.
Mr. Barkley, I'd like to remind you, you have 5 left on your speakers list, and we're down to 19 minutes, so. Okay.
I'll be very quick. I'm Nana Lampton. I'm chairman of Hartscoffel Incorporated, and Hartscoffel owns the land adjacent to the proposed development.
Could your address, please? Just address.
3915 Tierbracken Lane, Goshen, Kentucky. I've lived for 46 years and worked with cattle and farming on this particular piece of property. I also have been the manager of the cattle operation there for many years and continue in that role. What we're worried about is the downstream flow of sedimentation and other effluent from this development, because we have found that even now the stream goes down into our lower property on Rose Island Road as we border Goshen Lane all the way down and border Rose Island Road as well. Hartscoffel Farm is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and I speak in opposition to this development. It has inappropriate features, this new development. It's heavily wooded with steep slopes, several springs, and a blue line stream which flows onto Hartscoffel Farm. One of the proposed detention basins is on the blue line stream. The concerns are this erosion and downstream flow toward our farms below. We are worried about the developer ignoring environmental regulations as a habit. And I just would like to point out that we have no intention of developing our farms. They're going to be there for the long term, and we value the agricultural benefit. We grow Black Angus for Whole Foods, and it means a lot to me to know that this land is safe and not going to be interrupted in its long-term history. I thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and thank you.
Here.
Call Joyce Fletcher.
Good morning.
Where is the microphone?
It's right in the center, that little black, you just kind of have to get close to it. That's enough. You don't have to be that close. Just speak up.
All right. I'm Joyce Fletcher. I reside with my husband at 1600 Goshen Lane, Goshen, Kentucky. We have the 2 lots that are adjacent to the proposed detention basin 1. That detention basin will flow right into our pasture. So what I want to say, members of the Oldham County Planning and Development Commission, our family have been residents and resided on Goshen Lane next to the property we are here to discuss for 25 years. We moved here from Houston, Texas, and like so many others, we are in just this spot for 2 reasons: the school district and the beautiful rural setting. The placement of the 80-home, high-density subdivision proposed by Pulte will negatively impact both of these and will ruin the quality of life that my neighbors and we have come to associate with living on Goshen Lane. You should have a letter which I sent clarifying the capacity issue. Yes, the OCBE letter acknowledges capacity for this proposal, but it does not tell the whole story. This development will crowd classrooms at Harmony Elementary and will lead to a faster, quicker build of the Brownsboro Elementary School and inevitable redistricting of Goshen Lane students. Shifting gears, let me speak to our way of life on Goshen Lane. You have heard and will hear testimony to the fact that residents in this small corner of Oldham County are used to traveling this windy, curvy, hilly country road. Indeed, we have all utilized Goshen Lane, north and south sections, to come and go. My first and foremost argument against a subdivision of this nature is this. By more than doubling the number of homes on Goshen Lane, with a resultant doubling or tripling of the number of drivers coming and going on this road, the developers of the impending subdivision must widen and improve both the south and north ends of Goshen Lane. For safe entrance and egress to our homes, we must have this road improved from US 42 down to Rose Island Road. This should be non-negotiable. With the increase in population to this area, not only will daily traffic become a nightmare, but I challenge the commissioners to drive up the north end of Goshen Lane from Rose Island Road to my home in a speeding fire engine, because that is a serious possibility in this area. Next, I share with you from your mission statement. Our department focuses our efforts on long-term commitment to public safety, health and welfare, environmental integrity, quality design and development. My second major concern is this. In 2016, the Pulte Group, based in Atlanta, Georgia, was the third largest home construction company in the United States, and the internet is rife with bad reviews. 236 in the past 3 years in Better Business Bureau. In Consumer Affairs, updated January 2019, there were 42 reviews, averaging a total of 1 out of 5 stars. If you want to overpay for a home with issues from front to back, this is the place to do it. Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have had over 100 warranty claims, including 3 code violations for insulation missing or not meeting state specifications. And that was in Noblesville, Indiana. My point is, this proposed development is so far out of character with our area on Goshen Lane and does not take into consideration the quality of life that we residents love about our quiet corner. This subdivision cannot possibly meet the mission statement that you have adopted for Oldham County residents for environmental integrity and quality design and development for the welfare of the citizens who already live there. On a personal note, you also have letters from us referring to the impact of the increased runoff into our pastures, which we believe cannot be denied and will not be prevented. So I now circle back to where we began. In 1994, we bought our first horse. My husband got permission to mow trails on this property. We mowed, cut branches, moved logs that blocked paths, and we rode back there for 15 years. Our boys played in these woods, and we knew and loved these woods as much as anyone. They are densely wooded with overgrown underbrush, hills, and rocky creeks, and home to amazing wildlife. They are a precious resource in this amazing place that we call home. For us, the discussion of developing this property has become personal. There will, of course, be a time to develop these woods appropriately, but I implore you, do not approve the Pulte Group subdivision proposed for Goshen Lane. Thank you.
And Judge Conrad.
Thank you very much. I'm only going to speak very, very briefly because you have heard most of the arguments and the concerns of the residents.
Could we get your address for the record?
Yes, sir. I'm at 2025 Goshen Lane. I'm directly across from the northern tip of the development, the one in the big curve. I'm probably the house that's closest to this development. I first saw Goshen Lane in 1956. My parents bought a farm at the end of the road. It's now owned by the LaRocas. But from 56 to now, somebody in my family has always owned property and lived in that area. So my perspective is simply, this is what it was like and what is to come. It was a gravel road when I first started going out there. When I first started driving, I hit one of my sisters at the top of the hill, right near Judge Fields' mother's property. And my dad was mad when we called the cops. All right, so that gives you a little bit of an idea. Nobody was back that road. No development. No City of Goshen, no Lakeview Estates, nothing. That whole property over there has slowly and gradually been sold off and has been developed. And Mr. Talbot, who is a very nice man, I worked with his uncle for years in a law firm in Louisville. Mr. Talbot's right. This does appear to adjoin Settlers Point. But it's not going out through Settlers Point. I'm sure they would not like it any more than we like it. This is an undeveloped tract. It's the last tract, from what I can tell, that has been owned by Nance Realty, who are the Schneider heirs. Mr. Schneider and Mr. Stone from Goshen Utilities bought all this property years and years ago. It has slowly been sold and developed. So it's not like you have a situation where a person should be able to do with his land as he wishes. They have done a lot with their land. They've sold it off. This is it. This is a poor piece of land to have a conventional subdivision on. My concern is it's going to change things forever for the people who live back Goshen Lane like me, who have been on farms, who have been at night where it is quiet, no other sounds, no electric lights, nothing like that. This will soon be changed, and according to the subdivision design regulations, maintaining and enhancing the county's rural character and atmosphere will be changed. There's no doubt about it. There'll be teenagers driving out the north end of the road. The unfortunate death of a young woman, one such teenager, has occurred within the last year. This will bring a lot more. I'm just very concerned. I walk that road all the time. I usually do a 3-mile loop. I have neighbors who walk their dogs, people who bike. I'm just very worried about safety, and I don't think that this has appropriately addressed it. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Judge.
Good morning. I'm Bill Fithian. I live at Rivers Landing, 1814 Rivers Landing. And I want to talk about the potential impact of the stormwater runoff. Is this set up the way I... Okay. I think everybody's familiar with Rivers Landing. Just a couple of points here. Little Huckleberry Creek flows in here. There's a 4-foot drain culvert that runs from Cardinal Harbor that we get all the runoff from all this area up here that comes into Cardinal Harbor and then runs in right through here. A 4-foot drain culvert, 4 foot. The exit is 3 foot. A culvert in this area that runs into Little Huckleberry Creek, and contrary to what was said earlier, it continues to flow very slowly at times, but it continues to flow all the time. So the development, by the way, is up in this area. You guys are all with me on that. Here's what the lake looks like at normal pool. Today, there are 59 homes around the lake. There are 31 that face the back up to the river that are on the other side of the lake, if you will. This is what the lake looks like at normal pool again. We hold the record in number of paddleboard people and canoe people and kayak people. This is what it looks like when it's flooded, and it's flooded a great deal of the time. I heard earlier that there's not going to be any impact from the stormwater runoff from this development. I don't believe it. A couple more pictures. Here's a real beauty. This is an overview of the entire Rivers Landing area. By the way, there are 20 docks around the lake edge, and they're held in place by 18-foot stiff arms, so the docks float up and down. Water gets up real high, the stiff arms come up. The fear is that if they come up high enough, they pull out of the connection, which is into either the steel facing that's part of the seawall, or the cap that's part of the seawall. Think a sidewalk all the way around. We have problems with erosion. That comes with living by the lake, and no problem about that. So you can see what's involved there. We cannot have increased flooding. Here's a little backbreaking work, cleaning up the debris that comes 2 or 3 times a year following floods. I will tell you this, that following a 2 to 3 inch rainfall over a period of maybe a couple of days, the surface level of the lake comes up as much as 6 to 7 inches, which backs up into the yards as you saw here. So we're just really concerned about the volume of water that's going to come in from Little Huckleberry Creek, from Cardinal Harbor, and that's fueled by any additional runoff that's going to come down from this development. So I think that I want to make a request, a respectful request of this group and of the folks that represent Pulte, that if flooding does occur and it can be attributed to this additional development, I'd like to hear, prior to a decision being made by this organization, what's going to be done to correct it. And I think that should be part of, I'm not quite sure what the proper term would be, but that would be something that I would hope that you all would require them to make. Not sure how to say that exactly. So thank you for your time. I appreciate being able to come and talk with you today.
Bill, two things. Could you spell your last name, please?
Yes, F-I-T-H-I-A-N.
Okay, and then we need those for the record.
Yeah.
Those, so if you can just give them to me. If you want copies of those, they'll be in the record. You can
That's
contact
okay.
us afterwards, and we can make copies.
Chair, I request Rin
Thank you.
LaRocca to come up. I know we don't have that much time. I think it's within the bylaws of the commission to allow extra time. I think there are a lot more people who would like to speak, so we would request that formally.
Bill, we'll address that here in just a minute.
Bring it up. Good afternoon, my name is Renato La Rocca. I live at 2201 Goshen Lane. That's the northern part of Goshen Lane. I will talk fast in the interest of time. So behind you have the classic picture of Little Huckleberry Creek. I have 3 points that I want to address. One is going to be the water issue. The second will be the runoff issue, and the third is going to be the safety issue, which is obviously the most important. A lot of the people have already, quote, stolen my thunder, but there are a couple things that I want to say that are important. Number one, the water issue is important for us because we're Goshen Crest Farm. We have no Louisville water. We depend on a well. We have cisterns. I've raised 5 kids there. We've survived well, but if things change because north of us and higher, 30 feet to 40 feet higher than us, we have 30 acres of cement, 80 houses, the impact of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, draining through would be significant. Did I say I'm a cancer medicine physician? I hate carcinogens, okay? Prove to me that we're going to have the same clean water running off to Goshen Crest Farm that we've had up to now. Second thing I'd like to show, first one was Little Huckleberry Hill, Little Huckleberry Creek on a quiet day. This is Little Huckleberry Creek with a spring runoff. It is already today, in 2019, a very busy little creek, which has significant impacts on the people downstream from this, which is Rivers Landing. Let's go to the next. Okay, next. All right, how do I move to the next slide? You have command and control of my TV set. Very good. 32 is runoff. This is a picture of Goshen Lane in front of the proposed Pulte cluster home development. A couple days ago, we already have a water problem before starting. I sit at my house at 2201 Goshen Lane. I look out, I see this thing. This is Hardscuffle. That is not a lake. That is runoff directly on the Hardscuffle land, which I might remind everybody is part of the National Registry of Historical Places, which is part of the National Park Service. That is runoff that actually comes from Goshen Crest Farm. Now, let's go to the next slide. And here's a map. Let's go to the big picture. This is the famous northern part of Goshen Lane. And what you can see here, if I can draw it, we have a lake here that leads to a stream which then comes into my property. This stream drops and comes around, and this is the runoff, and this is how this lake looks, this collection looks in the summer. What I showed you is how it looks in the winter. Again, whoops, I'm going backwards. If you look carefully, again, this is the Pulte development below us. This is the lake, and you can see there's runoff or streams that come directly from the proposed Pulte development area. I really, really need to know that this runoff that dropped into that creek, which goes down the stream, which comes into my land, is going to remain clean. Quick other thing. One of the important things that was brought up was North Goshen Lane. In the Pulte world, their universe stops at their development. North Goshen Lane is still a single lane road. If you look here, this is 2 days ago, they show traffic control maps of two compact cars together. The reality is we have trucks, we have bigger cars, and thanks to the work of Dave Wallace bringing high fiber internet, we have many home businesses that have sprung up on Goshen Lane in the last 3 to 4 years. Translation to English. If you use a traffic methodology from the 1980s, you forget the fact that there's Amazon, DHL trucks, all the other UPS trucks that come all the time up and down our neighborhood. And you can see here in front of our area, 2 trucks, both of them have to get off the road in order to pass. And Pulte was proposing to do nothing to remedy this problem.
Dr. LaRocca, are you about
This
to?
is, yeah, right here, last slide. And this is the reason. We had a death earlier this year. I might remind, although they only go back 3 years, I'm told in about 9 years ago, 2009-ish, there was another fatality higher up on Goshen Lane. That's too many deaths. The most important thing for me is the safety of my family and of my neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. All right. Before we move forward, we're going to take about a 5-minute recess here. I'd like to call both councils up here, and we'll discuss about increasing the discussion time for both sides. So we'll get our council, and Mr. Urban, Mr. Talbot, and Mr. Barkley, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes.
How many more people want to speak?
Well, we'll worry about that here.